growing up in the South and growing up in nature was a very different kind of experience for me that I still draw from very much. I grew up in an area that was had long open plains of terrain. Basically, I grew up in a rice growing area, so it was flooded half the year. So that it was the light on the water and the distance and seeing light in architecture from a distance reflected on this light. That was, you know, it was my Turner experience in a way. And of course, I'm in an automobile seeing this too, because I drove at 13 and think nothing of driving 50 miles away at 13. So movement and light and landscape were an important part of the early experiences, which were not related till later when I made really contemporary work. I had fabulous high school teachers too. I had a wonderful high school librarian who could read anything we wanted to read. We could listen to contemporary music. I went to art school only 50 miles away, and I was very lucky that I had very interesting professors in art who were also interested in contemporary music. So I listened to contemporary music as well as have an understanding of contemporary art. So it was a great beginning for becoming a working artist. In fact, since I'm now an urban liver, I have the most effective and the most inexpensive, kind of lighting to really get the job done. What I don't like, I just got a new studio and it had a lot of low-hanging fluorescent fixtures. I instantly removed those because I don't like something that diminishes the architecture, and the lighting somehow pressed the architecture down. So as soon as I eliminated the lighting, put the lighting directly on the ceiling, the space completely opened up. I'm not a landscape painter, so I don't have to look out the window to make works. I'm not so interested in that. But I do love nature, and I do love gardening, and I do like the experience of being in nature. Well, it's curious that I began to readdress lighting in home because about 25 years ago, I purchased my first house, which was an old Victorian farmhouse in Long Island near the ocean. And I kept looking at the lighting, and it was all this kind of, although the house was old, they had put in electricity, and they had like 50s kind of lighting fixtures, these very tacky sort of lights. And I'd look at it and I'd say, well, what makes this room look so bad? And so finally I took all the lights out, and I made the lights myself out of neon and other kinds of light. And all of a sudden, the work, it became part of the work and the work experience of being in the house, even if I was in older architecture. And I think it was the beginning of really beginning to think of how you live in contemporary architecture, or how you can live in contemporary. And of course, being very jealous of seeing beautiful architecture. And there's a difference. When you live in greatly designed space, it's like having great art around. It's extremely important. Well, you begin to realize it might be very important to have that flame again. So I was very lucky that I did have water and I did have gas, which, let's not forget, is the first type of light in New York. I didn't stay for the entire blackout. Luckily, I could leave after 4 days. But it makes you realize so many things about the new urban living that, and we as Americans have not really addressed the urban situation that we live in. We have to begin to rebuild our superstructure. Our roads are terrible, our bridges are old. We have to begin to think of how large urban cultures deal in crisis. I lived through 9/11 too. I was 4 blocks away. It becomes, Americans, we're a young nation. We haven't had a war on our shores since the Civil War, and this was a very different kind of war. Europeans have experienced, although this generation hasn't, but your parents have all lived through the Second World War, the First World War, which makes for a very different cultural understanding of urban life and what can happen to it. I am, like cooking, I like many different kinds of food and music, and I've learned to appreciate and experience different kinds of music. As a young artist, I became introduced to contemporary music. I knew a lot of artists of my generation who made music. Phil Glass was a very important friend of mine. In fact, his studio was above me. And his first musicians were all from my area in Louisiana because they were jazz trained and classically trained, so they could play the music really quick. And they played for him and for Steve Reich. And of course, my music education as a child, I grew up in a very Rabelaisian Catholic area of Louisiana. My mother and her 4 sisters sang Latin for 40 years at the Mass, so it was somehow that kind of music. I heard Glorias the first thing in the morning. And also, growing up in the rich area of Cajun music and French music, I mean, at 13, I would go to a club. I would drive to a club. I would order a setup of bourbon and mixers and listen to Otis Redding and listen to Carla Thomas sing. And it's an experience I would have never had at another time in America. I think the most important thing about being an artist is to sustain creativity. That's the job. And if you're able to do that, and you're able to be, healthy mentally and physically enough to do it, I'm thrilled by it. The nice thing about being an artist is you don't retire. And that's sort of one of the more pleasant things about choosing a profession.